Hello, I'm Michael Carvel, and welcome to the DawgNation News Desk. We're here for a rather interesting story. You know, you get to the off season, and once you get past signing day, up until spring practice, it's pretty much, snooze time for news. But yesterday there was a bombshell report by, it started off with Brandon Marcello of Auburn 24/7 Sports, and it said that the Georgia football rivalry, it could be moved, and as early as 2020. Now, DawgNation's Mike Griffith, who we'll have on the show shortly, he did a great job checking with all of his UGA sources. Yeah, here's the two things we know. That the series is more than likely to be moved to October rather than September. That's Mike Griffith, our reporter with DawgNation. And then the earlier schedule change would be for the 2020 season. Obviously, there were some people who talked about maybe 2019, but that just seems illogical. And Mike Griffith and Brandon Marcello, they reported all that. So big news, and I gotta say, when the stories went up on social media, not a lot of Georgia fans happy with this decision. I guess there's many reasons for that. Georgia, they're accustomed to having the oldest rivalry in the South played at the end of the season. They don't like change, and I guess the number one reason Georgia fans dislike this is because they feel like they're appeasing Auburn with this move. This was Auburn's request because they feel they don't like to play back-to-back games against Georgia and Alabama either the same year on the road or at home. They don't like that they had to play both those people and both those the best teams in the SEC in back-to-back games, number one. And number two, they feel like they don't like to have them playing both of them on the road or at home each year. Hopefully that made sense. But a couple things to remember here. We have Mike Griffith coming on. That Auburn does not play, in fact, Georgia and Alabama back-to-back. They always have a game sandwiched in between. Chip Towers wrote that in his column, Towers Take, this morning. Okay, we have joining us on the phone Mike Griffith of DawgNation, who's been all over this story. Mike, how you doing today?
Doing good, Michael.
So give us your thoughts. Let's go through this one by one. Give us your thoughts on what's going on here.
Well, this was something that came up at the SEC spring meetings in Destin, and was talked a lot about with Gus Malzahn and Kirby Smart, and we wrote it back then, but I don't think it was kind of in May, and nobody's really paying attention, and this is something that could happen in 2 years kind of deal. But Gus Malzahn and Kirby Smart, both talked about feeling that they were at a disadvantage, playing two rivalry games in the same month, and ultimately, sometimes on the road in the same year. Now, all this kind of got messed up, if you will, in 2012, 2013, when the SEC added Texas A&M and Missouri, and Georgia bit the bullet and played at Auburn 2 consecutive years. And what that did was give Georgia road games with Auburn and Georgia Tech in the same year, and Auburn road games with Alabama and Georgia in the same year, which, when you have both of them at home, you're happy about it. When you have both of them on the road, you're not happy about it. So, as Kirby said back in May, it's not just a simple matter of Auburn and Georgia deciding to fix it. They've got to work through the SEC because there's a lot of other considerations and factors that other schools have with their schedules. So this is something that's been in the works. This is something that Kirby Smart wants addressed. If the answer is that you can't change it and one team's not going to play at the other team 2 years in a row, certainly Georgia's not going to do that again. Auburn would have to be the team to do that. But that at the very least, you can move the rivalry games out of the same month. So now you're playing Auburn in October instead of November, and you get a little bit more space between the rivalry game with Auburn and Georgia Tech. And this is a deal where Kirby Smart knows what he thinks is best for Georgia. And he's going to tell Greg McGarity. And McGarity's going to take it to the conference office, and they're going to do what's best for Georgia. I've heard so much, Michael, about why do you want to help Auburn? What does this do for Auburn? People, stop. Georgia is going to do what's best for Georgia. It doesn't matter. If it helps Auburn, okay, great. But if it helps Georgia, that's what Kirby Smart cares about. He's not going to worry about what helps Tennessee or Auburn or Alabama. All he cares about is his program. And he's going to ask his athletic director to represent that to the SEC. And then it's up to the SEC office to see if they can make it happen with all the other schools. And I think that's where we're at with it.
So, Mike, two things there. Number one, Georgia had to play back-to-back road games against Auburn when the SEC added teams. So that's one issue. And we've seen your quotes by Kirby Smart that he clearly hopes to get that favor returned. The second thing is, I guess there's whispers or rumors or maybe reports that Kirby Smart actually supports this change. What do you know about that?
Yeah, things don't happen at Georgia without Kirby Smart's support. Greg McGarry's the AD, and ultimately he's the liaison to the SEC. But if people haven't been paying attention, it's Kirby's world now, and Kirby gets what Kirby wants, and that was the case with the salaries. I mean, if Kirby wanted more money, he could have gotten more money to hire more coaches, but Kirby hired the guys that he wanted to hire. And I'm not sure where this negative theory comes about as far as Georgia's getting stuck with this and stuck with that. Listen, Kirby Smart is getting exactly what he wants. If they can't move, if they can't get Auburn to play him in back-to-back years in Athens, which there's complications with the SEC office, obviously, then the next best scenario is for the game to be moved to October. Not going to happen in September, I've been told. That's what we've got in our story. I know the first report you saw from the Auburn site said September, October. Well, that's not true. September is out the window. If it goes down like we think it will, it'll happen in October. I don't really understand, again, what the concern is here. I know that, certainly Georgia fans had a right to be upset in 2012 and 2013 when Georgia kind of took one for the team and played back-to-back road games at Auburn. But this is something that, it wouldn't be happening if Kirby Smart didn't support it and if he didn't think it was best for Georgia.
Yeah, Mike, I'm a Georgia fan, and here's what I don't like about it. I don't like that if the schedule shifted, Georgia would have to play in October Auburn, Tennessee, and Florida, clearly the best three teams other than Georgia in the SEC East. So walk me through that.
Well, you want to have those non-conference games. You want to have your Notre Dames and your Clemsons, right? And that's in September. And, the coach wants to have September to get his team dialed in. Let's face it, some of those bye games, as we call them, those Austin P games, UMass games, those are valuable because they give you an opportunity to play some young guys. They give you a chance to rest some starters. They give you a chance to test some guys out and find out what you want for the stretch run, which is October and November. So the other thing to think about now, Michael, as far as the scheduling model, is you also want to be pretty fresh when you play the first week of December because Georgia's got plans of being there in Atlanta every year. And if you're beating yourself up with games against Auburn and rival Georgia Tech and everything they're going to try and do to take you out, you may not be at your best come December. So I think the thinking is, you play the stretch run in October, you've had September to prep, play your non-conference tough game. Last year they played South Carolina in there, so you warm up with the Gamecocks. And then October, is your stretch run. I mean, that's going to determine whether or not you win the East. You win the East, and then you want November. You finish up in November, but you don't necessarily want to be slugging it out the last 2 or 3 weeks of November, knowing that you got Alabama waiting for you the first week of December. I mean, the plan maybe used to be to win the East, but the plan now is to win the SEC and win a national championship. And I think Kirby's thinking big, and I think that's what's behind the logic.
Mike, I know you're really busy reporting on this story today, and we won't keep you too long. I have two more questions. The first one is, does Georgia agree, does Kirby Smart agree to this change, moving the game to October without getting back-to-back home games, getting repaid for when the SEC changed its schedule?
I don't know that. I don't know that, Michael. I don't know if there's more to the story that we don't know yet. You know, the conversations that I've had with people haven't gone that far. But I will say that there's a method to Kirby's madness. And there's another story that I'm working on, and I'm hoping that I can have it on tomorrow on DawgNation. But, you know, Kirby Smart's a deep thinker, folks. He ain't just sitting back waiting to see what the SEC is going to deal Georgia. Okay? He's proactive. And everything that's happening is happening with Kirby Smart's knowledge and happening with Kirby Smart's blessings. He knows exactly how he wants to build this program into a championship program. And we've seen how close he is as it is. And if he thinks that some adjustments to the schedule are going to help, I think I would trust Kirby Smart to know what's best for Georgia football, you know, probably more than me or you.
Agreed on that. Mike, how the heck does the SEC do this by the 2020 season? I mean, all these schedules seem like they're done decades in advance, and it seems it would like be a major chess move for the SEC to switch that all around, which would cause changes with, I guess, every other SEC school. How would that all work? And it seems like a lot of these games, especially the non-conference ones, are locked into these contracts.
Right. So that's why you're not going to see much change in September. That's why we're talking about October, because that's the sake of the conference schedule. You know, what I think is there could be another SEC team that's interested in trading dates. I think that the window of opportunity opened up. You know, let's just throw it out there. Maybe Tennessee doesn't want to have to play Georgia in October. Maybe Tennessee thinks they'd rather play Georgia in November. Now, I'm not saying that's true. Maybe it's Vanderbilt. I don't know. But typically, if more than one school has an interest in a change, I mean, Greg Sankey, I think, has proven himself to be an outstanding commissioner. I think he does well. He may not have all the ideas, you know, that Roy Kramer had or Mike Slav had. I do think he works extremely well with the schools in terms of getting people what they want and trying to find workable solutions. So my thought is there's a silent school out there that wants a trade-off, and it plays into what Georgia has requested. You know, this Auburn Georgia thing, you know, Gus and Kirby have been upset about this for a couple of years now. They don't want to have to play each other in November every year. They don't like, you know, the placement of the games, you know. And so I think what's happened is that maybe another school has made a request that you know, everybody kind of gets what they want. And at the end of the day, Michael, that's what I would tell people to keep in mind. It is possible for this state moving to benefit both Auburn and Georgia. It doesn't have to be somebody wins and somebody loses. And what I'm telling you is that Kirby Smart is not going to be okay with anything that is going to put Georgia at a disadvantage.
Very last question. What needs to happen next for this to move forward?
The SEC schools have to vote on it. It'll be discussed at the SEC spring meeting. Obviously, that's something that DawgNation is always at. I imagine I'll be back there again this year at the end of May. That'll be one of the talking points. I'm sure that the transfers will come up again. You know, if you go back, and maybe I should do a refresher, because Kirby really had some fascinating things to say about the transfer situation last May that I thought was pretty interesting. So, and I've used a lot of that when a lot of the custom field stuff was going on. We went back and looked at what Kirby said, and he kind of called it. He kind of predicted it. So,
before we let you go, any other stories that you'll be writing about that DawgNation fans should be looking forward to this week?
Yeah, you know, like I said, more on scheduling. I think you're going to see more on scheduling, and we're looking closer and closer at the NFL Combine. You know, we'll be staffing that. Georgia will have 9 players there, 8 of them working out. So you'll see a lot more prep on that as we get closer. And I'm hoping to get a hold of Jason Stanley and then talk with him. He's one of the guys that's not going to the Combine that I think could have an NFL career. And certainly we'll follow up on Elijah Holyfield. There's a lot been said about him. Some scouts really like him, some scouts really don't. So we'll find out where Elijah's at with all that.
Mike Griffith, thank you so much for joining us. I know you slammed today with reporting on stories all over DawgNation. Great job covering this issue and breaking news last night. We look forward to talking to you again. All right. That was Mike Griffith from DawgNation. Check out some of his stories on DawgNation. They're on the front page this morning or today. Do want to go back to one thing. I know that Mike Griffith just said that Kirby Smart reportedly supports all of this. Sure, there's got to be something in it for Kirby, such as getting Auburn back-to-back at home. But I do want to talk about the fan reaction. Because as we talked about early in the show, and even if you look in our Facebook comments, and we'll get to questions and comments in a moment, it seems like most UGA fans are against moving the Auburn game. Let's show you some of these tweets. Reaction. Logan Booker, who's a Cox employee in Athens, he said, "I just cannot imagine sweating during the Auburn-Georgia football game, both literally and figuratively." Yeah, the environment will definitely be much warmer in October. Another comment, "This is trash. Nothing like Georgia-Auburn in November. Auburn acts like Georgia and Alabama play them back-to-back when every year they have the Citadel in between." And that's true. That is very true. That's the false narrative being pushed out there that Auburn plays Georgia and Alabama back-to-back. They always have a sandwich game in there. So another tweet, it was to Tony Barnhart, one of the most respected people in the business. Somebody commenting on his tweet. Ryan Cooper says, "This is stupid. Zero benefit for Georgia, while also never receiving a payback for having played back-to-back games at Auburn. Kirby should not allow this." So there you have it, folks. A couple of other things. We want to take your comments on YouTube and Facebook. And then we'll have Connor Riley, another one of our important DawgNation writers who has weighed in on this issue, if you read Good Day UGA this morning. So some of the comments on Facebook. Stephen Nicholas Brown says, "Moving the game to October doesn't benefit us at all." Marshall Fleming, "So move it to October and have Tennessee, Auburn, Florida all back-to-back. That's BS." And that's the point I was bringing up to Mike. Another comment. "Are we losing our bye week before Florida?" We don't know that yet. I would doubt that. I don't think Kirby would agree to that if all this wasn't to his advantage. And let's take one more comment. "Let's look at it either way. Playing them early and get out of it healthy, so for the SEC championship game, or play them late and have a chance of being beat up for the SEC championship game." That's a good point there. Now we want to bring in Connor Riley. He wrote this article. You've seen so many stories on the website. He wrote a Good Day UGA today about why changing the tradition of the Georgia-Auburn game may not be for the better. And Connor, he's putting on his headset there. I'll read one of his key points. He says, "An earlier game against Auburn would likely benefit the Tigers more than the Bulldogs, simply because it removes Auburn having to play Georgia and Alabama in a short span at the end of the season. As for Georgia, the move prevents November road games against Auburn and Georgia Tech in odd number years. A possible game that could be swapped is the Tennessee game, which would give Georgia a late season showdown against a key SEC foe." So Connor, do you want to sort of expand on some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, a couple different things weighing in early. One, I do think that if we see this move, where Georgia does give Auburn a favor by playing that game earlier in the season, we're probably going to see, I would venture to guess, Georgia get that return home game that they were due. Quite frankly, as a student who was at the university in that 4-year span where I got one Auburn home game, I kind of would be in favor of seeing that. As far as moving the game forward, I do kind of think that Georgia, if it had its way, would flip that Tennessee game to the end of the season, November. That way you do still get a late season marquee SEC game that fans can sort of circle and look forward to. Because as I wrote today, Georgia has played Auburn in November every year since 1936. To give you some context, that 1936 game was played in Columbus, Georgia, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a one-term president at the time. As far as, what else this sort of means for Georgia, that Auburn game is a huge recruiting weekend. This year, just off the top of my head, I know Kobe Dean and Tyreek Stevenson, two, at the time, uncommitted major Georgia targets, both made it a point and a priority to sort of be at that game. And, lastly, my concern with this is, okay, so you change this to sort of, maybe get an extra home game out of it and acquiesce Auburn in a way. What's to say stopping you from moving the Georgia Tech game to September that way, and you could pad the end of your season with an FCS opponent instead of playing them in September? What's to theoretically say, hey, instead of doing the Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville every year, why not rotate, Athens, Gainesville, Jacksonville? And at a certain point, when you start tweaking some of these traditions, it gets to sort of be like what happened with the old Big East, which in my opinion is the best basketball conference of all time. And you have Boston College leave, and then you have Pitt and Syracuse leave, and now it's just a shell of what it was. And I think college basketball is worse off for it, and I wonder if the Georgia football schedule and sort of traditions of Georgia football would be worse if you start moving all these traditions around.
And that's Connor Riley. Connor, what did you say, which game do you see being likely moved from October to November?
I would most likely think that they're going to try and move the Tennessee game, just because, again, like you said, you don't want to play Auburn, Tennessee, Florida in a very short stretch. And also, by moving Tennessee to November, you do sort of have that marquee late-season SEC game, which Auburn has sort of always functioned as. And I do think that, that would alleviate some concerns about moving that, because Auburn, it's the biggest. In my lifetime, it's always been the biggest November game. It's the game Georgia fans really circle and look forward to just because of the time, and with Georgia Tech being when it is after Thanksgiving, there's usually not a huge rush to come back, whereas like the Auburn game is a game fans circle on their calendar the day it comes out, and when it's announced that that's a night game, fans are through the roof, over the moon happy, because it's one of the, in my opinion, that's one of the best environments a Georgia fan can experience, other than maybe the Georgia-Florida game in Jacksonville.
Right. So Connor, you heard Mike Griffith. He said that Kirby Smart supports this idea. So two questions. Why do you think he supports this idea? But more importantly, do you think he will approve this idea if they don't get the back-to-back home games made up for how Georgia did that for Auburn and when the SEC welcomed two new teams?
So I think the reason he supports the idea is to get the extra home game, to theoretically recoup a home game that was lost, recoup an extra recruiting weekend, because you're still playing Auburn, you're still going to play Auburn, and I think Kirby's thinking is, I don't really care when I play them. They're still, it's either at the end of a long stretch, where you play an SEC West, like this past season, for example, you go SEC West foe LSU in the middle of October, bye week, Florida at Kentucky, and then you round that stretch off with Auburn. That's a tough, I can understand how he looks at it and sees that's, the end of a very tough stretch if Auburn had its act together this year. Whereas, if you move them to earlier in the season, you might be a little bit healthier and you might be a little bit more better prepared for that Auburn game instead of, coming in banged up, having gone through 4 or 5 straight meat grinder SEC games.
So me as a Georgia fan, there's just something not right. I feel like Georgia is sort of catering to Auburn here. Is that erroneous thinking or irrational thinking?
I don't think that's totally wrong. I like I wrote and like you've said, this move probably benefits Auburn a lot more than it benefits Georgia on the surface. I don't know the huge recruiting boost you're going to get by just getting that extra home game in a given year. Under Kirby Smart, with all Georgia signed the number 3, the number 1, and the number 2 overall classes in the last 3 cycles. I don't know how much theoretically better you could get by recouping an extra home game in a given year. Whereas Auburn, I do give some credits to the theory that they do have to play Georgia. They do get a relatively easy opponent, and then they have to go play Alabama. Factored in, of course, with they have to play in an even number of years, they have to play at Georgia and at Alabama. And so, sort of this year, where things didn't get off to a great start for Auburn, and they get to that Georgia game, they lose that, turn around, you have to play Alabama 2 weeks later. That's 2 losses out of your last 3 to end the season. And as a coach, that puts a lot of pressure on you because, you've seen when seasons don't end very well, that sort of tends to turn up the heat cooker. Whereas, a loss to Georgia in October maybe doesn't sting as much when factored in with the loss to Alabama at the end of the season.
So our resident Georgia historian, Chip Towers, who's been on the Georgia beat for so long and has great connections at the schools, he wrote a Towers take this morning, and we're not going to take you through a lot of it because we've already discussed it. But one point that he did bring up was, his answer was, he says, I've argued this since the year the conference's last expansion, that they needed to bring Auburn into the SEC East Division anyway. Put Missouri in the West where it belongs. Another argument for another day, I guess. So your thoughts on that?
Well, so moving Auburn to the East, well, yeah, it seems to make sense. You're also making Alabama have to pick between having to play Tennessee every year or having to play Auburn every year with those crossover rivalries. And so just because of the power dynamics of the conference and the fact that the conference is located in Birmingham, I just don't really see that as moving Auburn to the East as a very realistic factor or solution to the problem. Enrico Murillo, I think on YouTube, he sums it up really well. If Georgia acquiesces to Auburn, it better be getting an extra home game out of this. If it just moves it to move it, I don't really understand why you would do that. At least getting that extra home game does make a little bit more sense.
Yeah, I can't see any way Kirby Smart will agree to this unless he gets that home game back, because he has some leverage there. If Auburn really wants this, they got to give up something, and they should have given it up a long time ago, in my opinion. But I think that'll be a key negotiating tactic, just like you said. So let's look for other comments on Facebook and YouTube.
Travis, I'm sorry if I mispronounced
go ahead.
His name here. Baltzigar, is this completely up to Kirby? Where's McGarity on this? Kirby is no likely going to play a big hand in this, but McGarity is sort of going to have to be the face of this in terms of angling to get this done and angling with the other SEC ADs and presidents to sort of make the acquiesce and make the changes to the SEC schedule. He's probably going to be the one who will have to go ahead in front of all the other athletic directors and presidents and people who decide the SEC schedule and put forth Georgia's case, but Kirby Smart is going to have a very heavy hand in sort of preparing the statement that McGarity is going to read.
Yeah, Willie Gray Jr. on Facebook says, is this Kirby or McGarity making this choice, which you just addressed? Mike Stryker adds in, nothing is done with Kirby without Kirby's blessing. And let's see if we have some more questions here. Going to our YouTube page.
This is from a bit earlier, but Mary Ellen Tolper, she says, Kirby, if you do this and UGA doesn't make it to the championship, you're going to have DawgNation up in arms. And I kind of do think this is it's a calculated risk by Smart in changing this around, because like we've mentioned, playing Auburn in November is a tradition, and it's fine, to sort of move stuff around and change things the way they're done if you're winning and you're winning big. But if you don't, you have like a Gus Malzahn season where you go 7-5 or you're struggling and things aren't going well, that looks really, really bad then, because not only are you trying to rewrite the way Georgia football is done, but you're doing it and you're also not necessarily improving the product on the field.
Good point. Good point. Okay, thank you for joining us. That was Connor Riley of DawgNation. Does so much stuff for us around here. Extremely valuable team member. A couple things I want to say in closing. Number one, please join us back at 3 p.m. today for Before the Hedges, the UGA recruiting show with Jeff Sintel. And then Brandon Adams. I saw a lot of questions in our comments section about where is BA. BA is taking some much needed time off. Guy's the hardest working person I've ever been around, I think. And he'll be back tomorrow for DawgNation Daily at 10 a.m., so please join us then. Okay, I'm Michael Carvel, and thanks again for joining us from the DawgNation News Desk. Have a good day.